while back, I made a tier list. And over time, my opinions have changed. So I'm doing it again. I told someone this list was outdated and I'd make a new one. And I started thinking, maybe I could do that now. So I will. Okay, George Washington. S tier. Don't need to explain. It's George Washington. He invented the presidency. Very good. John Adams is, without a doubt, our worst founding father president. The Alien Sedition Act was just too much of a terrible precedent to set for the new country, giving the president a power to arrest those who speak out against the government, directly violating the First Amendment. After it had just been made and Washington signed the law under George Washington, that's just bad. He is without a doubt our worst founding father president. But he's still a founding father at the end of the day. So he did some good things, I guess. The Marines successfully avoiding a war with France. That was good. Effective negotiations with John Adams. So I'll put him C tier. Thomas Jefferson. All those mistakes made by John Adams, the Alien Sedition Act, he repealed them and freed and pardoned those who were wrongfully arrested. And having principles of using limited government, cutting taxes, spending, and the debt, that's the dream right there. Not even Reagan could do that. But, there is the Embargo Act, but I don't feel that. That's not too much of a hindrance on his presidency as people think. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, yet he's still one of our greatest presidents. So I don't think the Embargo Act is that big of a deal. And plus, it's Thomas Jefferson. Watch a Jackson Jefferson goated video if you want to know. Want to see more details. But he's very good. James Madison. Now, James Madison is, without a doubt, our second worst founding father president. But he's got to deal with people like Washington and Jefferson, so it's not that fair. He was a very fine president. Very good president. Amazing president, if you could say. The only thing holding him back is that War of 1812. But, it's not that big a deal. It's overblown by a lot of people. White House burned down. Big deal. We still have some successes. The war gave us our national anthem that's still used today. That war gave us that. It led to the era of good feelings when we were our most united. The war united us. It was the most united our country's ever been. And in this time of political divide, it's very good. Long for those days. And it was those days were there with James Madison. Granted, most of that was seen under James Monroe, but, Madison got started. And also, before the War of 1812, it was like only 2 years of his presidency. There were still other years in his presidency. While he was doing that, before the war, he was continuing Jefferson's principles of, limiting the government and all that stuff. That good Jefferson stuff. He was continuing that. He was Jefferson's protege. And then after it, he would implement some more Federalist-esque policies. But, they still had the support. He still had the support of Jefferson. He was bringing more ways of thinking in. Bringing more unique ideas. Uniting more people. And so it was good. So just saying. A lot of people don't like James Madison for the War of 1812. I don't think it's as big a deal as people make it out to be. James Monroe. Now, the era of good feelings I was talking about was the prime of that era, the heights of that era was under James Monroe. He was just like Thomas Jefferson, but with none of that War of 1812 holding him back. What sets him apart, though, is the Missouri Compromise. So that makes him a little lower. So all that Jefferson stuff that he gets praised for, like limiting the government, lowering taxes, lowering the debt, lowering spending, all that stuff, that clean, effective governance, not a bloated government. It was all under James Monroe and Jefferson. So that's very good. Very good. John Quincy Adams is kind of like his dad. He's kind of mediocre. He proposed an American system. Proposed a lot of interesting stuff that the country hadn't seen up to that point, but barely any of it got done. So it doesn't really matter. Well, he could have done more, but he couldn't. And also the Tariff of Abominations. Not that good. Will lead to the nullification crisis. The first ever Civil War-esque secession crisis was planted by John Quincy Adams. And the spoils system, when he had the person that got him elected, Henry Clay, made him a Secretary of State, giving a buddy a cabinet position. Just kind of laid the groundwork for the spoil system people blame Andrew Jackson for. He kind of got that started. So, kind of pretty flawed presidency. Could have done more. The good stuff he couldn't get done. Disastrous things. But, he had potential, I guess. So he's pretty mid, if at best. Andrew Jackson. He paid off the national debt. That's good. And, ushered in a new era where the people, expanding the people's right to vote. Well, white people, but, it's the 1830s. What do you want? This ain't the civil rights movement. So, it's the best we could have gotten. Jacksonian democracy would influence America for the next centuries. Most, if not all, major presidents that people praise as the best had some kind of influence on Jackson. Those presidents deserve credit, but Jackson influenced them. You can't deny that. You can't deny Andrew Jackson left a major impact that without him, our country would not be the same. He did a lot of good things. But then again, he did some bad things. Spoil system, sure he didn't start it, but he kicked it into overdrive, lay the groundwork for the Trail of Tears, forcing Native Americans out of their lands. Populism is pretty flawed most of the time. Most people don't have it work with that, especially later on with that William James Bryan fool. But, most of the time populism doesn't work. So Jackson has his flaws. But overall, I think he was a good president. Paying off the debt is a very monstrous feat. So we'll put him B tier. Martin Van Buren completely crapped the bed. The Panic of 1837, the worst financial crisis that country have ever seen up to that point, actually carrying out what would be the Trail of Tears of relocating to Cherokee. And nothing really good to balance it out. Very horrible president. A lot of Jackson's flaws were highlighted under him. All of the major ramifications of Jackson's presidency were mainly seen with Martin Van Buren. And he got most of the blame for it, which, it's not totally unfounded. And also Jackson, I forgot to mention, he got rid of the National Bank. National Bank, pretty bad. Don't like it. Good on you, Jackson. William Henry Harrison. He died in a month. You can't really rank him. John Tyler. A lot of people tend to rank him as one of the worst presidents. It's mainly probably due to the fact they don't like him because he joined the Confederacy, which, yes, is bad. But we're not ranking him based off actions after his presidency. We're not ranking him based off that. We're ranking him based off his presidency. And as president, he annexed Texas, which is good. He set the precedent of what the vice president should do after the president dies and he takes over, allowing much better presidents to take over. Without that, like a lot of American history, it just doesn't happen without Tyler. Also vetoed the National Bank, which I believe was probably for the best. So not too many flaws, but then there's the flaws of he alienated everyone. Democrats, he hated Jackson, so they weren't gonna, work with him. Alienated the Whigs by vetoing the National Bank. Alienated the Whigs, couldn't get anything done. Very, very idiotic, stubborn, just not that good at anything else. But he did some good things, so he's kind of in the middle for me. Not good, but not as bad as people think because most of the bad stuff came after his presidency and while he wasn't president. James K. Polk. He was the most effective president. All his promises, one term. Gathered a whole bunch of land, lowered tariffs, all of that. That's very impressive. Very impressive president. And, I don't really have to say much. What ranks him above Jackson was he has a lot of that Jacksonian, all the good parts of Jackson, but nowhere near as many as the flaws because, again, only one term. If he ran for another term, he'd probably have to, reap the consequences of gathering a bunch of land without telling what to do with it, which would lead to the Civil War, which is pretty flawed, but, most of that would come after his presidency, so it doesn't rank him too bad, but very effective. Probably the most effective president we've ever had. So very good president. Taylor, I've been a little iffy on whether or not you can actually rank Taylor. Because, it was only 16 months. The third shortest serving president. Not much to Taylor. He showed potential. He's underrated, as in when people talk about presidents with potential, they never bring him up. when they really should. But overall, I don't think you can rank them. So we won't. Milton Fillmore signed the Fugitive Slave Act and, would create tensions that would lead to the Civil War. Not a good president, but he looks like Alec Baldwin, and he saved the Library of Congress because he was a firefighter. And he read, his favorite book was The Dictionary. Again, has nothing to do with his presidency, so it doesn't save him. Franklin Pierce, Kansas-Nebraska Act, bleeding Kansas, tensions to the Civil War, not very good. Then again, he paid over half of the national debt. Well, we still have high debt, so it doesn't really benefit us as much as it should, but also the gas and purchase, I guess, is kind of good, but nothing else this man did. He was nowhere near in the right mental state to be president after what happened to his son. So, he could have done better, but after that, he was not in the right headspace. He was depressed. He was constantly drinking, so that ruined his presidency a bit. Civil War. The final nail in the coffin for the Civil War was bleeding Kansas. If anything, some argue the Civil War really began with bleeding Kansas. They just took a break until Fort Sumter. So yeah, very bad president. Buchanan, probably, you could argue he's the worst president. He did nothing while the biggest crisis was unfolding before him. States were leaving and he did nothing about it. He said that they shouldn't do it, but he didn't stop them. Dred Scott decision. Probably the worst decision the Supreme Court has ever made. He supported it. Very bad. All that Civil War tension came to a breaking point in his presidency, and he did nothing about it. The country was falling apart, and he just watched as everything burned down around him. Very bad president. Though in my opinion, not the worst, but he's definitely up there. Abraham Lincoln saved the country and freed the slaves. But he suspended habeas corpus. That's bad. So that's why Washington's better. Andrew Johnson completely shat the bed under Lincoln's Reconstruction. And he was the first president to be impeached because he did illegal stuff, by hiring a cabinet member without congressional approval when you needed to. So yeah, violated that, got impeached. Closest to being kicked out, but he wasn't kicked out. He really should have been. Very bad president. Just abandoned all that Reconstruction stuff. There'd be no Jim Crow or need for a civil rights movement if Andrew Johnson wasn't president. So he's definitely the worst president. Grant, kind of complicated with Grant. The worst financial crisis that country had ever seen was while he was president. That's bad. Very corrupt. That's bad. But, he was very good for civil rights. Had he been president right after Lincoln and not Andrew Johnson, our country would have been, and when it comes to civil rights, it would have been much better. Maybe MLK would not have the need to have a dream if it weren't for people like Johnson and Grant been president right after Lincoln. So very good for civil rights. Very strong ally for the newly freedmen. But, he's marred by all that corruption, bad economic policy. But, he's still good. Very good president. Hayes, he's got a lot of all those flaws I just mentioned for Grant, all those Grant's flaws, Hayes undid it. Introduced civil service reform. He's one of the greatest presidents on the grounds of economic recovery. One of the greatest economic recoveries our country's ever seen was while Hayes was president. Those two things alone make him a far better president than people give him credit for. And sure, you could argue he abandoned all the black people at the Compromise of 1877. He was a fraud, but it's far more complicated than that. The troops are going to be... Reconstruction is going to end no matter who was president. If anything, Grant was withdrawing his troops far before Hayes was. So no matter what, you can't really blame Hayes because it was going to happen either way. And Hayes didn't want to do it. But, he decided to obey what the law said because, he's not going to do that. Returned us to the gold standard after all that greenback nonsense. Very effective president. Well, he could have been more effective. So that's a flaw. But, very good president. Since Polk was far more effective than Hayes, we'll rank him right in between that. And also the White House never burned down, so that's why he's higher than Madison. Garfield died in 6 months. Can't be ranked. Arthur continued the civil service reform, but then signed the Chinese Exclusion Act. And also revamped the Navy. I think that puts him in between them. Grover Cleveland was kind of like a proto Calvin Coolidge in his first term. All that stuff that makes Calvin Coolidge so great is what Cleveland did it. Well, not to the same extent as Coolidge. Continue that Jeffersonian ideas of limiting the power of the government. Probably the last president before the imperial era, wouldn't overreach his power because the quote, the man, the Constitution doesn't allow me to. That's very good precedent set. But then his second term, during another economic disaster, he couldn't do much for it. It was very bad economic policies that he couldn't solve, the Panic of 1893. And his second term was very flawed. So he has a really good first term, but a really bad second term. His first term, great. Second term, bad. So I feel like those two cancel out, and he's kind of mid. Benjamin Harrison, all those economic flaws about how economic disasters, all I was talking about, it starts under Harrison because of the McKinley Tariff. And also tried to annex Hawaii. It was probably the most shady thing our country ever did up to that point. So that's bad. Very bad. And also handed out medals of honor like candy after the army massacred a bunch of innocent Native Americans. So that's bad. But, the Sherman Antitrust Act, which he couldn't enforce because he was so ineffective. But hey, he proposed the Civil Rights Act, which he couldn't get passed because, again, wasn't effective. Very bad president. But, Sherman Antitrust Act is something. But all those flaws with Cleveland and Harrison came to that financial crisis. Then McKinley comes in and he solves it. He is able to fix it. So good on you, McKinley. But then he had pretty bad foreign policy. The Philippine-American War was very bad. Probably the worst war we ever fought. Not as in the ground we lost, but like some of the stuff we did was so messed up. Is also very imperialistic. So, you know what? I'll try to set some down. He's right here. His foreign policy just ruins him. But his domestic and economic policies were pretty effective. He's probably one of the very few presidents that made tariffs work. That's an achievement. Now, you know the channel name. It's Roosevelt Reagan. So you should probably expect this. Roosevelt's going to be ranked really high. Probably, he's got the effectiveness of James K. Polk. None of the disasters of, not leaving all that land to the question of slavery and the slave debate causing the Civil War. None of that, so that's why he's ranked higher than Polk. His foreign policy led to the Panama Canal. He ended foreign wars, went after the power of business when they were abusing their power and all that stuff. But he didn't mindlessly go after business like some kind of communist, so that's good. And also protected food and drugs. And also, there was only flaws, the Brownsville affair. I don't know why I always call it the Browntown affair. That's pretty bad. But, those soldiers are probably going to get lynched either way. So, if anything, Roosevelt probably did them a favor by saving them from lynchings. And also, so that's something. And also the Panic of 1907, which was only 3 weeks. Just to show you how effective Roosevelt's policies were. Would launch a new era of American politics, the progressive era, which still influences us today. Major impact. He's on Rushmore for a reason. He's the reason the reason he's on Rushmore is you got Washington, who invented this country, same with Jefferson, Lincoln, who saved it, and Roosevelt made it a big deal. So that's good. William Howard Taft, he busted up more trust than Roosevelt, but then he would sign tariff laws that would divide his own party, which would lead to the divide of the election in 1912, which would lead to Woodrow Wilson. And also, he set up the income tax. Yeah, that's right. The income tax. Why, Taft? Why? So, yeah, that sets down Taft. But, but everything else went okay. He's a very underrated president. A lot of people don't give him credit that he deserves. Wilson actually enforced the income tax and signed prohibition into law. Very bad. And also the Espionage and Sedition Acts. Lied about World War I. Very racist. Resegregated the government after it had been desegregated. Vocal supporter of the Jim Crow policies in the South. But hey, he gave women the right to vote. So that's good, I guess. And also, World War I, he had pretty good leadership other than the Sedition and Espionage Act. But hey, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. Can't all be winners. And I guess if you're Polish, you like Wilson because thanks to Wilson, Poland's a country. But I'm not Polish, so that won't affect him. Harding, very corrupt, but undid some of Wilson's stuff. So that's why he's not as bad, but he's still pretty bad because of all the corruption. Probably the most corrupt president we've ever had. Calvin Coolidge, the Roaring Twenties. It was probably the most. If the founding fathers were alive today and they saw all the presidents, they probably would approve of Coolidge the most. All that stuff I like about limiting government, lowering taxes, and lowering the debt. Last president to lower the debt, by the way. Last president, over 100 years ago. Yeah, I should tell you something. And gave the Native American citizenship. That's pretty good. Again, great economic recovery and economic boom. The Roaring Twenties, one of the biggest economic booms of all time, while he was president. Very hands off. There's a quote from him was, "My greatest accomplishment was minding my own business," and yeah, that's what the president ought to do. He was one of the last few presidents to understand that government shouldn't just enter in affairs. It shouldn't take on responsibilities it wasn't supposed to. He understood that. That just because there's an affair going on doesn't automatically mean the government should get involved and solve a bunch of non-existent problems. That government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. He was one of the last presidents to understand that. He just he was hands off, as he should have been. Laissez-faire economics. I like that. I'm more a libertarian man myself. Well, granted, not as libertarian as others. But the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act and the Great Depression. It's bad. Very bad, Hoover. People blame him for the Great Depression, which was right. Well, granted, if Hoover had not signed the tariff laws, it could have just been the Great Recession. He made the Great Depression. Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, very idiotic. I don't really need to say much for Herbert Hoover. Nothing went right. He made everything worse. Though granted, I feel like the country wasn't falling apart. He wasn't insanely racist, so he's not as bad as these four. FDR. Now, I'm not like most people that rank FDR very highly. I'm just not one of those people. If you ask me, I think he's either one of the most overrated presidents we've ever had. The New Deal made the Depression worse. Like example, the way he helped farmers was by making them destroy their own crops to make prices higher during a time when people couldn't afford things. He would make things more expensive to help some special interest group instead of the whole people. That was the whole New Deal. Just help one particular group, but not help anyone else. And that whole policy just made the Depression worse. The Depression didn't end. The New Deal didn't solve the Depression. World War II did, which granted he did lead us through. He led us by arresting his innocent people, by deterring his own citizens, the Japanese, which is flawed. Did nothing for civil rights. Hired a Klansman to be part of the Supreme Court. Tried to pack the Supreme Court because of how unconstitutional his New Deal legislation was. He ran for a third term. That I just don't support that. Washington wanted the president to only have 2 terms and not be a king for life. FDR was the closest thing we had for a king for life. Well, there have been more king-like presidents, but at least they ran for 2 terms. He ran 4 times. You're not supposed to do that. Well, in my opinion, you're not supposed to do that. It never should have needed. There probably should have been no need to make it a law, but it is only because of FDR. So, but World War II, but he did carry us through some of our greatest crises. So, I guess it's good. You can't rank, he's not bad or anything, but I think he's kind of, I'll rank him here. But pretty overrated overall, I think. The New Deal, the government isn't the solution, government is the problem. But the New Deal is the opposite of that. Don't like that very much. Harry Truman was like FDR, but nowhere near as abusive of power. Also, the Marshall Plan prevented World War III. Tried to subvert the spread of communism. He's from Missouri. I'm biased. Yeah. Marshall Plan was very good. Very good. Like the Marshall Plan. Love the Marshall Plan. Very good Marshall Plan. Though granted the Cold War began while he was president. But what are you gonna do? After World War II, there's two world powers left. Of course, there's going to be some kind of conflict between the two. The Cold War was kind of inevitable, if you ask me. So you can't really blame Truman for it too much. But Korea was pretty bad. Eisenhower, NASA, interstate highway system, integration, ending Korea, actually living up to his promise of getting us out of Korea. He actually did, without any disaster. It wasn't as disastrous as other withdrawals of wars. So good on you. Good for Eisenhower. I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike. JFK. Now I've seen a lot of people rank JFK in the top 10. I don't think he's top 10. I mean, he could have been top 10 had he had more time to be president. He was cut too short to be top 10. I'm sorry, but he showed a lot of potential. Got the ball rolling on the Civil Rights Act. Prevented nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis, handled it very effectively. But then there's the Bay of Pigs, and the fact he just got cut too short. We don't rank potential here. We're not ranking potential. If we did, I would rank Taylor. So, I'll rank him here. I mean, I get it. If he had ran for one, if he had a whole complete term and then ran for a second term, he would have been much higher. LBJ. The only thing this man did right was the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And all that stuff JFK got started. The only thing he did on himself was the Great Society, which is the New Deal, but somehow worse, and then the Vietnam War. The draft. Hippies, for God's sake, happened while he was president. I can never forgive him for that. But the Civil Rights Act's pretty good. But overall, pretty bad president, if you ask me. There's some good for LBJ. So, I guess he's not too bad, but he's bad overall. His presidency was the breaking point for Ronald Reagan, so thank you for Ronald Reagan, but, seeing how LBJ's the opposite philosophy, that's pretty bad for LBJ's part. People just don't seem to understand that the intention of the Founding Fathers was to have the government not be intermingling with the affairs of the people. Well, granted, some did, but most of them didn't. People like Jefferson, Monroe, and Washington. They didn't want the government constantly intermingling in the affairs of the people. Here comes new FDR and LBJ intermingling with the affairs of the people. The government was not supposed to do that. They were taking in responsibilities they never should have. And, just abuse of power. Abuse of federal power. And just creating a system of people constantly being dependent on welfare. Creating people that are dependent. And this is supposed to be an independent country. Yet now we're constantly being dependent, making people dependent on government. And not giving them any opportunities to rise on their own because they make them dependent on government and the welfare state. Boo. Nixon took us off the gold standard. Watergate. Price controls. Bad. Bad president. Well, the moon's pretty good, I guess. But that's about it. Gerald Ford. Pretty underrated president, in my opinion. Think of it. The Watergate scandal, drowning the nation's spirit. And Gerald Ford was the lifeguard on duty. And he gave us CPR and he resuscitated us. Yeah. And, did some early Reagan stuff like tax cuts and deregulation. Yeah. But, pretty brief presidency. He showed potential. If he got like a full term, he would have been ranked higher. Jimmy Carter. A lot of people think Jimmy Carter's one of our worst presidents, this is not unfounded. But, he did do some good things. He deregulated oil, trucking, railways, and the airlines, which allowed those industries to start thriving because the government wasn't no longer regulating them to the ground. Now they could actually be free to do what they needed to do to actually be successful. Now they were successful because, no government intermingling. So it's pretty good as a libertarian man. That's very good, Jimmy Carter. And also the Camp David Accords. That's good. But then there's the Iran hostage crisis and stagflation, which is bad. So pretty mixed, but overall with the Iran hostage crisis and stagflation, I mean, the deregulation laid the groundwork for it ending, but, it just couldn't happen while he was president. So, I mean, that sets him back. He's, mm, mm, he's right here. Not as bad as people think, though. Also, great human being, but we don't rank that. We don't rank that kind of stuff here. So, Jimmy Carter, not as, he's bad, but just not one of our worst, as people think. Now, you know this channel's name, Roosevelt Reagan. So I feel like this should not come as a surprise where he's going to be ranked. Now, I only like Reagan because he's a great communicator. He's actually a pretty bad president. Like, the Reaganomics is so idiotic. Income inequality, rich get richer, poor get poor, Iran hostage, Iran Contra. Just trickle down economics. What do they say? AIDS. Bad AIDS. I hate AIDS. Reagan gave everyone AIDS. He personally came to people's homes and injected them with AIDS. Very evil. Reagan was evil. He was the devil. Now, if you believe any of that, just know, I think you're wrong. Reagan was fantastic. Reagan was a great president. He ended the Cold War. And before you say, Reagan didn't end the Cold War, yes, he did. His treaties with Gorbachev, the intermediate, the INF treaties, the tear down this wall speech, it ended the Cold War. The Cold War had been the most defining moment of most half of the century. People were so constantly afraid that they're going to be blown up by nukes. Reagan made it so that you didn't have to be afraid anymore. We no longer had to be scared of the Cold War or the Soviet Union. We didn't have to be scared anymore because of Ronald Reagan. Economic recovery from stagflation. Gerald Ford, Nixon, and Carter couldn't do a thing about it. Reagan ended it because he knew he was probably the last president to understand something so simple. Government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. So with tax cuts and deregulation that Jimmy Carter got started, the crisis had finally stopped gripping at the American people. And they're constantly being bound by government red tape. He cut that down, and people are finally free to do what they wanted to do with their own money. They could invest as they should have. And he revealed that the people could perfectly solve problems for themselves. We don't need to constantly need the government doing it for us. And the government is ineffective, so it's a bad thing at all. The government cannot do what the private class can do, as Reagan outlined in his Time for Choosing speech, and it was revealed that that was in fact true. The 80s boom, the longest economic boom in American history, 20 years. It's all because of Ronald Reagan. The 80s were a great time. Except for the first 2 years, there's a recession, but that was just a Jimmy Carter hangover. It's not really Reagan's fault. I mean, I guess you could blame him because, he was the president, but, he solved it. He did it. And Iran AIDS, a lot of people say he didn't do anything on AIDS, but that's not true. He did fund some research for AIDS. In fact, it was so obscure, wasn't even brought up in the debates between him and Mondale. So, what could he have done? There's nothing much he really could have done about AIDS, so that's not as bad as people think. Iran-Contra, that was mainly done behind his back with Ollie North and probably H.W. Bush. So, again, and also he owned up to his mistakes instead of saying, I'm not a crook and firing people investigating him, unlike Mr. Crook Nixon. So he was more owned up to his mistakes and, never resigned from office because of it. He wasn't a coward running away from his problems like Nixon was. I mean, I guess he did defund the mental institutions, but, what are you going to do? Someone else is going to do it anyway. It's not much you could do there. A lot of the flaws I've defended, I've made a video completely to blocking and debunking some of those points they make against Reagan. So watch that video if you want more details. Because I imagine there's probably going to be people wanting more details on these. I probably made some previous. There's been other people making previous videos on some of the stuff. If you want full detailed analysis on some of the stuff, watch Retro Historian. Actual historical articles and documentaries, not me. If you want insight on detailed analysis on Forrest Gump, then you probably found the right channel. But Ronald Reagan, man, great president. Great president. Great communicator. Great unifier. The last president to win an electoral, just an electoral landslide. Last one to do that. The most unified. Every time he illustrated a point, it just made sense. You know, he could make it make sense. He could say a bunch of nonsense and make it make sense. So maybe that's why I love him so much. I'm falling for all that stuff. But who knows? Who knows? But, just so great. Ronald Reagan was so great. I wish I could have voted for him. I would have proudly have voted for him as many times as possible. Okay, let's just get to someone else now. Okay, H.W. Bush, or as I've heard him called, Bush the Elder. Don't know what to make of that. Read my lips. No new taxes. There's new taxes. 90s recession. Gulf War is pretty okay. Disability's actually pretty good. But, kind of mid. This probably could have been a better follow-up to Ronald Reagan. So, yeah, we'll put him here. I mean, he's not that bad. He did some good things. A lot of that, when the Cold War was ending, it was, wow, he was technically the president, but Reagan did all the work. No matter who would have been president, the Cold War would have ended. So Reagan deserves the credit. Bush the Elder, kind of pretty mediocre overall. But, he did good things. He also did bad things, so. Not too bad, not too good. Mediocre. Bill Clinton. All that stuff I was talking about Reagan, it was happening while he was president too. He managed to reap some of the benefits and managed to make contributed some booms himself. Very good, very economically responsible. Continued some of that aspects of Reaganomics. Limiting the government. Balance the budget. Reagan couldn't even do that, but there was no Cold War for him to deal with. So I'd say Reagan's still better. So, he managed to reap some of the benefits that Reagan managed to lay about, but, he still did stuff. He still deserves some credit for it. He's like Reagan, but just not as good. And also, he got impeached because, he committed some crimes trying to cover up a scandal. So that's pretty bad. But overall, pretty good. Some mistakes. Maybe some foreign policy blunders here, some blunders here and there. So, overall, pretty good. Pretty good. I'll put him here. Now, W, bad president. Very bad president. The Patriot Act completely just took a massive crap on the Fourth Amendment. The Iraq War, the Afghan wars, it's bad. Shouldn't have happened. Should not have happened, but it happened anyway. The 2008 crisis, horrible response to Hurricane Katrina. Nothing went right while he was president. Massive debt. Oh, I'll grant you, a lot of presidents have massive debt, so it's not, you can't really flock too much for that. But, just bad. Very bad president. Even though he's a modern president, I feel like there's more consensus. There's a pretty common view that he was a bad president by both parties. Trump got his political start by bashing on W. Bush with Jeb Bush while he's trying to get nominated in 2016. And Vance recently dogged on some of his stuff. And while Democrats always hated him. Well, they're probably going to do that anyway. But he is the son of Ronald Reagan's last president. That doesn't save him. At all. Yeah. Well, pretty bad. We'll put him in D tier for W. Obama. He's a modern president. If you say he's like one of the greatest presidents or one of the worst presidents, that doesn't really say, that just says what your political stances are. That doesn't really prove anything. Obama, he won't be ranked. I don't want to start a war over modern politics. That's where all these modern presidents will go. They won't be ranked. Because I don't want to start a war over modern politics. If you say Obama, Biden, or Trump were one of the greatest presidents or one of the worst presidents, then you're just saying what your political party is today. It's like these people overall, they're probably mediocre at best. If I were to actually rank them, they wouldn't be ranked too high or too low. They're not that big a deal. Everything they did, another president probably already did and did better. And other presidents that did bad things, they were far worse. Trump's not some kind of big fascist dictator. He's not some kind of he's not the savior of America. Joe Biden was I feel like there's more consent. You could argue there's more consensus that he was bad, but yeah, you can't really. There's some people that like Biden and Obama as well. Obama. You could argue that he did some bad. He had pretty bad foreign policy. Put the bomb in Obama and was promising to withdraw some of the troops, and he didn't withdraw enough. Kept us in Afghanistan despite his promises. But an Obamacare was. I mean, if you support that kind of stuff, I guess you would say it's great. But if you don't, you'd say it's bad. But these people are just mediocre. If you have most of your opinions on them probably just stems from your own political biases, not out of the fact they are actually good or bad. So they won't be ranked. And this is my official updated tier list, more accurate to how I think now. I feel like it's probably pretty good. Now, there's definitely going to be people that disagree with this. Yeah, there's definitely people that disagree with this. Especially with my opinions on this guy. But, let me know. Anyway. Is this better or far worse than my other tier list? Are you going to go in the comments man, Roosevelt Reagan, what the hell is this? This is abomination. Never make a video again, I'm not going to finish that. Or maybe man, this is the greatest thing ever. You're the greatest YouTuber ever. Let me know. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say about that.